What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Gaelic Gridiron podcast, the number one American football podcast for NFL and American football fans in Ireland. Joining me is a man who's going to give us a bit of a look behind the scenes of how American football on our screens is brought to life. Dan Presser, producer with the ACC network on ESPN. Dan, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Dan, we were chatting before you came on. You've been dealing with a bit of an injury. You had an unfortunate incident recently. I hope your foot is healing nicely.
Yeah, I got into a little fight with a bird, and I did not win the fight. So I fell off the roof and shattered my heel. But apparently the heel is very important for weight bearing, which I didn't necessarily know that much about the heel before today, or before this summer. But now I know a lot about the heel. So I'm on the mend though. I can drive now, which is big for me. I was kind of crippled there in a bed for a few months, but that was a few months ago. So I'm starting the mend. I'm starting to walk.
You're on the mend. You're on the right road back to recovery anyway.
Yes. But it made for a pretty miserable summer. We had just joined this pool, paid all these entry fees to this pool. I got hurt about 4 days after that. And, I think I'm going to start walking about a day after that pool closes. So that was a bit of a whiff, but it happens, it happens. Could be dead.
It could always be worse. Dan, I'm really interested to get your point of view. I mean, obviously, as a producer, you have such a different insight, on the whole production of how games and how sports is brought to our screens. But before we get into that, I'd like to talk a bit about your background and how you got into your current role as a producer on the ACC network.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm one of the few people that actually use their college degree to what they wanted to do. You hear so many people taking psychology or whatever, and they don't do anything. But I went to Syracuse. I studied broadcast journalism. I really loved it. I kind of wanted to be on air originally. I used to be a lot more handsome than this, so I thought I could be on air at one point. But I just applied at a job out of school. I applied to both on air stuff and behind the scenes, and I said whatever I got first, I was going to take. And I got a PA job at ESPN, and I had a good resume. Syracuse is a great school for broadcast communications. I was an intern at NBC for the Athens Olympics in 2004. So the resume looked good. And then that got me the behind the scenes stuff. And I did it and I loved it. And it was in Connecticut. I'm from Connecticut. So, a lot of people don't love living in Connecticut, but I'm one of the few that actually does love living here. So I think I use that to my benefit also. And then I ended up going to MLB Network in New Jersey to cover baseball, and that's where I started producing. And it's a totally different kind of producing there, because it's kind of like I don't know if you guys watch the NFL Red Zone, but it's bouncing around. It's essentially MLB Tonight is essentially the baseball version of Red Zone. So like, hey, Mike Trout is up. All right, let's go out live. We'll watch that at bat. Now we're going to go down and watch Derek Jeter. He's going for his 3,000th hit. So it's like you're bouncing around. So it's really off the cuff, and you're learning how to do things without a rundown. And so I do think it makes you a better producer, because now all of a sudden, like when things are scripted, it's easy. Like, oh, I just have to go down the road. I don't have to think, So it does make you a little bit better to do it that way. At least like do the hard stuff first, and then everything else after that seems kind of easy. But and then 2019, we had our second child, and we were, a few hours from home, and 2 kids. I don't know if you have any children, but 2 kids is a lot of kids. And we didn't want to get a little closer to some grandparents. So my old roommate at ESPN, we were both PAs together, was running the ACC network. So I reached out to him, and we worked something out, and I got a job at the ACC network. And that's where I've been since 2019. We launched the network in 2019, and we just celebrated our 5-year anniversary. So.
And it's definitely, you can see that it has gone from strength to strength, and being part of the ESPN family as well has definitely helped with bringing the ACC brand to prominence as well. But you talked about how you studied broadcast journalism there at Syracuse. Was working in in live entertainment, in broadcasting, was that something that you always dreamed of doing, or something you kind of fell into?
Yeah, I mean, the original dream was obviously to be on the field and be the superstar shortstop, goalie, whatever. But, I'm 5'7" and 165 pounds. So once I did the math, I was able to figure out that dream wasn't all that likely. So this was kind of the next best thing. And I thought it would be a way to work in sports. And, I do love working in sports. There's times, just like any job, there's times where it's like, I'm working Labor Day weekend. We were working the whole weekend. College football was being played,
Yeah.
Thursday till Monday. So like everyone else is out having barbecues and this and that. And like, I'm working, which stinks, but also like, I'm watching a football game,
Yeah.
like that's my work. It could be
It's the dream.
not in a coal mine somewhere, so it could be worse. And I enjoy it. And there's pros and cons to everything. And, as long as the pros outweigh the cons, then you're doing all right. So.
I can imagine that working in, all the holidays comes as part and parcel of being in your position, within working in sports. But, kind of tell me, what does a typical game week look for you like during the season?
Well, I mean, I'll go off last year because this year isn't typical because I have a broken leg and all that stuff. But last year I traveled for the ACC Huddle, which is our weekly show, like kind of the version of College Game Day, the ESPN College Game Day. So we would decide usually like on Monday what city, or usually we would know Saturday or Sunday actually, what city we were going to or school we were going to next week. We'd book travel, we'd get the hotels, all that stuff. And then we'd fly out usually Thursday, kind of get settled at the university. Because, sometimes these universities, with NFL and major professional sports, like there's an airport right there, like you fly right into LA or Pittsburgh or New York or Chicago. But, Blacksburg, Virginia Tech is a 50-minute drive from Roanoke Airport, which is a connection. So it's not the easiest places to get to, especially I'm from Connecticut, so it's a small airport. We have a small airport. So small airport to small airport doesn't always work that well. But so we'd fly out Thursday. Friday, we'd have a bunch of meetings, and we'd have one show out there, ACC PM it was called. And we'd be on campus and hyping up the game. And then Saturday, we'd get there probably at 8 a.m. We'd have breakfast. We'd meet. We had an 11 o'clock show leading into all the games. And then we're kind of what we call wraps, which is halftime of the game. We're there for halftime. And if the game, they're scheduled for 3.5 hour blocks, but say the game goes 3 hours and 20 minutes, then we come on and we get to the next game. So we're in the, not even an office. Like it's like a truck, but like 8 a.m. till we don't finish till the last game's at 8, finishes at 11:30, 12, we're 1 o'clock, 8 a.m. to 1 o'clock is usually what our Saturday, at 1 a.m., 1 a.m., sorry. 8 a.m. to 1 a.m. is usually what the Saturday looks like. And then again, I'm married, so I try and catch that first flight back at 5 a.m. And, you're at the airport on 2 hours of sleep, and then you come home to kids that want to play nonstop. So that's generally what my weekends are. At least they were last year. This year, they're a little more subdued with the injury, but.
It definitely sounds hectic, and obviously as a producer it's your responsibility to make sure that all of this flows as smoothly as possible. So what would be your kind of main area of responsibility, say within the ACC huddle, or what would you, is there anything that you specifically focus on within your role?
Yeah, I mean, so again, like we kind of split it up a little bit where, because again, it's 17 hours. I'm not sitting there for 17 hours myself doing everything. I'll do like what's called the ACC Huddle, like the full hour show. So at 11 o'clock, and then I do 6:30 leading into the 8 o'clock game, and then the post-game show. And then another producer will kind of take the half times and fills and stuff. So I focus on kind of like the pre-games and the post-games. And, to be honest with you, a lot of my producing came from MLB Network, whereas like fly by the seat of your pants type stuff. So I'm more comfortable with the post-game stuff where it's like, all right, hey, see a great shot. Let's take that shot. That guy's crying. Let's, so you're kind of, read and react type stuff as opposed to scripting everything. That's because a pregame show, everything's scripted for the most part. You might get some breaking news and stuff like that, but so those are kind of my biggest roles. And yeah, like you're kind of responsible for almost anything, even if it's like, hey, the talent's ride didn't come to pick them up at the hotel at time. Like you're getting your hands dirty in that. Now, granted, I'm usually the PCs take care of that stuff, so I don't have to do that. But you're involved in everything, good or bad. You kind of have your fingers on. So.
And is that a part of the job that you enjoy the most? Is it kind of the unpredictability of it, or the kind of excitement, and do you get a rush from that kind of thing on game day?
Yeah, that's my favorite part, is like just a post game show where it's like, because I can think of an example last year, Georgia Tech. I don't know if you remember the Georgia Tech Miami game. Miami could have just taken a knee and ended the game, but for some reason they handed the ball off, they fumbled, and then all of a sudden 2 plays later or 3 plays later, Georgia Tech comes down the field, scores a 70-yard touchdown, wins it. So everything we had planned was gone. Like, oh, we're going to interview Coach Cristobal, then we're going to have this player. And then it's like, 35 seconds later, the other team won. So like you're kind of scrambling, and it is fun. It's a rush and it's fun. And, as long as things go well, it can be a lot of fun. Obviously it's stressful if something doesn't go well and things fall through and all that. But that's kind of the joys of live television. And I do generally enjoy that stuff, and I'm still young enough that I enjoy it. Maybe in 15, 20 years I might not feel the same, but
so actually, it's funny, and this just shows you the power of social media, and brings me into my next question. Is, since we have been setting up this podcast, I've been getting hit on my Facebook feed with a lot of videos from ACC Network, potentially due to my Googling and doing my research. But how would you say that social and digital media kind of has impacted on how sports fans consume media these days?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems like it's kind of a clear age gap thing where, my parents' generation, they still watch the games and they watch the highlights on whatever the channel is, where it's like, the younger generation, to me, it's like, oh, did you see that throw that Haynes King made? I saw it on Instagram. And like almost all of their consumption is from social media. So we're kind of at a weird crossroads where one generation might not get any of their information from social media, and one might get all of it from social media. So we're kind of sitting on the fence of like serving both audiences, because we don't want to, tick off an older generation, and we don't want to ignore a younger generation. And so that's kind of a moving target, I think. And, I think we're trying our best to do it, but it's also, it's weird because it's like, if you want to be good with social media, you kind of have to be young. You have to know everything. You have to be young and involved in all that. But then it's also like, to run a company or a department successfully, you kind of have to have experience and, be older. So it's a weird spot where, you can't have some 23-year-old kid running the entire social media department, but also like they're the ones that know social media better. So they have to be involved. So it's I do think that it's certainly trending that way, and as the newer generation continues, just like people's attention span is shorter and shorter. And, that's just how people consume news, sports, like gossip, anything. It's like, you'll see a random, USA Today Instagram story or something like that. And, oh, yeah, that's how you found out that Kamala Harris is running. It's just like that. It feels like that's how people are consuming almost, again, I say people, younger people mostly, but but it's definitely trending that way and becoming more and more important,
Now, unfortunately, Dan, you weren't able to make the trip to Dublin for the recent game between Georgia Tech and Florida State. But of course, it was a massive ACC matchup, which involved, of course, ESPN and the ACC network coming across the Atlantic to cover that game live.
That's a direct flight from Bradley, by the way. We don't have a lot of direct flights from Hartford to Europe. That's, I think, the only one is to Dublin. So Aer Lingus, Connecticut to Dublin.
You got lucky there with the direct flight. But talk to me about the scale and magnitude of taking a production of this size on the road internationally. I mean, it must be a logistical kind of nightmare.
I mean, again, so we have like departments that handle all that, and it is a logistical nightmare because like even when we go to Clemson, which we've been to 4 times in the last 2 years, we still have an hour meeting and like, all right, where are we going to park? Who's going to do that? There's a million things that go into it. And let alone, we have a same E&G crew that we use on everyone down south, but like now we have to hire an E&G crew. You have to get a local producer to help you around stuff. You don't know the streets, you don't know the area, you don't know the stadium. Like all these stadiums we've been inside 5, 6, 7 times. We know exactly which gate to go through, where to park, where all that. So it is a logistical nightmare. And I worked in 2010. My wife and I, well, she was at the time, we weren't married. I actually met her out there, but the World Cup in South Africa. And it's just like something that scale, and that's obviously bigger than one game. But it's just like it's the amount of work and organization, all that stuff that goes into some of these international events. It's honestly, it's mind blowing. I mean, and it takes dozens of people full-time job just to figure out, and it's like, it's things as silly as like, oh, make sure you bring the right hair dryer, cause you don't want to blow a fuse out there, so it's like, not that I have to worry about that, but
I can relate to you there.
Yeah. But people tell me you dry hair. I don't know. That's something people do. So it's like, there's so much that goes into it, and just being in a different country, and at least, they speak English here, obviously. So that helps, but it is the logistics behind it, and getting a truck, like we have our trucks that we use here. We don't have a truck in Ireland. So you have to find a TV, it's just, everything is like start from scratch. Whereas like in the U.S., if we go to an Alabama game or a Clemson game or anywhere, Notre Dame, like you're going to have contacts, you have a camera crew, you know all that stuff. You have a little database that's built up of all that stuff. Where you go to Ireland every couple of years, like you don't really have a huge database. You might have a guy you used last time that is still working in the industry, so you use him again, but it's a little bit different than our kind of normal week to week stuff. But
there's a big difference between organizing logistics for a trip down to South Carolina for Clemson and coming across the Atlantic to a different continent.
It's entirely different. Although again, no directs. There's no directs from Bradley to Virginia Tech. There is a direct to Dublin, so that logistically is easier. But
at least we had that going for us. Here's a question for you: did anyone in the ACC network predict the scoreline? Georgia Tech kicking the last-second field goal to knock off Florida State.
Not on the record, at least. Nobody was on the record, brave enough to do it on the record. But I mean, listen, we're in a spot where we watch all these teams. We know all these teams. So yes, the national media, or will say, "Oh, Florida State, they're ranked 10, they're going to crush them." But we all know that Haynes King is a great quarterback, and Coach T is great. Like we knew it'd be closer than they say, or at least we thought. Tough to say anything, but. But I'm not sure anyone predicted a last-second field goal win for Georgia Tech. So
it definitely was a thrilling finale. I suppose great as well for the ACC network to be able to cover that and have the international presence of. I think there was something like 500 million. Oh, sorry, yeah, 5 million people watched the broadcast on ESPN. So I think it was one of the most viewed week 0 matchups in recent years.
Yeah, well, because Florida State's a big brand name too, and I could be mistaken, but I feel like whenever I watch those NFL Europe games, the European audience loves the kicks and the punts and anything that has to do with kicks. So I'm glad we got to kick a game winner for you guys.
And our own David Shanahan was involved in that as the holder, so that made the victory even more special. But if you look back to the last time that the ACC played properly in Ireland, which was in 2016, Boston College and Georgia Tech, and the ACC network, as you say, wasn't even in existence then. Yeah. But the brand itself has grown massively. Has grown massively since. What would you say are some of the driving factors behind that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's exposure. It's the same kind of thing like in 1992 when the Dream Team was boom. The Dream Team's basketball is international. The big deal here in the States. I don't know how big the Dream Team is in Ireland, but like they in theory put professional basketball on the map. They beat teams by 45 points, but you got to see Michael Jordan play. And all these other countries got to see these players. So it's like I'm sure they don't. There's not a ton of exposure for American football all over Europe, but when you see it, it's kind of fun, and like it's just getting the name out there and the sport and all that stuff that I think people kind of. I mean, in the U.S. we gravitate towards it, and I think generally it's an exciting product, and this game was no different. And I think just getting eyes on the product is what grows it so much. I know, like my wife went to Nebraska, or she's from Nebraska, and they played out there against Northwestern, and that was a great game too, and. And I think anytime it's a great game, I think you get people wanting more, and it's like, that the American football is kind of fun. Like maybe next time it's here, I'll go. So
yeah,
and that's how it starts. And then all of a sudden you're in a different continent, and you're like the NFL. The NFL's playing in Brazil on Friday. It's you make yourself global, and there's a lot more money and eyeballs and all that stuff out there. The more global you can make yourself. So.
And do you think that having those big names involved, like, Florida State obviously is a massive brand. You talked about the NFL Europe games there. Is having those bigger brands, those bigger names, in your view, a key factor in growing the game of American football internationally?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I think to grow it, you do need big names, big players. Like, again, NFL, it felt like at the beginning of NFL, it was always like, the Jaguars and the Dolphins, these like teams that like no one really wants to see, but because it's hard to get teams to agree to go over there. It's like, well, why would I give up one of my home games where I'm going to make all this money and blah 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 just to go to a different? So it's difficult to get good teams to do it, but I do think it helps when all of a sudden Tom Brady is out there playing in Wembley Stadium. Like that's something that you're going to go see. Everyone knows who Tom Brady is. It's like not everyone knows who Trevor Lawrence is necessarily, but. I think it really helps. The challenge is to get these conferences and leagues and, all that stuff to get the good teams because they're generally a little more reluctant. Although, again, I mean, they've all been really successful. So I think if you're trying to sell it, you just fall back on like, hey, look at what happened. The teams had a great time. They made this much money, blah, blah, blah. Like I think it's going to become easier and easier to sell it to the better teams. But I think, the bigger brand names you can get out there, Nebraska was another brand name that they got a huge fan base. And I think you're always more likely to get more attention when it's a Nebraska or a Florida State or something like that than it's, one of these other schools that isn't as good and doesn't have as many alumni internationally. Not that Nebraska has a lot of international alumni, but I just think it helps. The bigger the names, the more it helps.
Well, we're actually going to have another ACC team in the form of University of Pittsburgh coming over in 2027, I believe they're scheduled to come over. Okay. So hopefully by then the interest will have increased more and more. But speaking about the ACC specifically for a minute, it's really kind of emerged over the last couple of weeks as one of the conferences to watch, particularly Miami. I mean, they've kind of come out of nowhere. They bet Florida there last weekend. What are your thoughts on that and the emergence of the ACC this year?
Yeah, I mean it's always kind of been like a premier conference. Maybe not like the premier as far as SEC. SEC generally wins more titles and all that stuff, but I mean they're right there as far as Clemson's always in the playoff. Florida State's won 2 national titles in the last 15 years. It's like so they're always kind of right there, and I would argue they're as good as the Big Ten gets all this press about how great they are, but they don't really win titles. It's a lot of it is press and perception and all that stuff too. So because I remember all you hear is how good the SEC is, but like the ACC had a winning record against the SEC last year. And, so it's like, but the SEC was better. It's like, well, when they played the games, they weren't better. How do you want to settle this fight? Because on the field, the ACC was better, but that's kind of the nature of college sports too. And that's the fun part of college sports is debating hypotheticals and, we would have crushed you if we did this. And our conference is better. Our team is better. Our school, like that's kind of the fun part of it. And there's some conference pride with us. And, I found myself rooting pretty hard for SMU volleyball last night over Nebraska, just because, it's a way for the ACC to stick it to the Big Ten. So, you find yourself pulling for the conference a little bit, especially, when you work for, I wasn't pulling for them when I didn't work for them, but
it's funny you mentioned SMU there because they're one of the new teams who has joined the ACC this year, along with Stanford and Cal, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep, that's correct.
I mean, it's kind of crazy how the conferences are how teams or universities are moving conferences and changing conference, and it speaks to the attraction perhaps as the ACC as a member of the Power Five that these schools are choosing to join the ACC.
Yeah, well, it's down to a Power 4 now. There's only 4 of them now, so it's a strange landscape, and like it feels like it's the right thing business wise for all of these conferences to grab teams, grab schools. You don't want to be left out, So and those SMU, Cal, and Stanford, I mean, they have incredible track records. Like you look at some of the athletes that Tiger Woods went to Stanford, and like Andrew Luck, and Cal has Colin Morikawa. They have all these like Aaron Rodgers, Marshawn Lynch, like they have these great alumni and great players, and they win national championships and everything. And that's kind of the ACC's big thing too, is like we're good at almost everything. Like soccer, they dominate women's soccer, like volleyball, field hockey, lacrosse. It's almost all the sports, and obviously football drives the bus. That makes the most money and all that stuff. And the ACC is good at football too. I mean, Clemson's won a title and FSU's won a title the last 10 years. So. But it's the only thing, it's not great for fans to be switching conferences. At least I don't think so. I mean, I that's just my opinion. That's not, anyone's official, but like, it's tougher as a fan when you have all these, like I grew up, I went to Syracuse. And so we had all these rivalries with these Big East schools. And then we switched to the ACC, and I'm like, all right, well now I have to, you start over. It's not the end of the world. Like I learned to hate Duke, I can do it too. So, but it's just kind of, fans, I think, enjoy, and the whole nature of NIL and transfer portal and all that stuff. Fans generally, the older fans like, well, this is my team. I'm going to get a guy as a freshman. He's going to leave as a senior. I'm going to get to know him and see him grow over 4 years. But, that's not really the way it is anymore. And like, good for the athletes because they deserve some of that money. They deserve a piece of the pie. I'm not trying to say that NIL ruined college sports, but like they deserve it more, as much if not more than other people. It's just, I personally think there could be some sort of, restrictions, and there's not, the NCAA kind of, they wanted to be hands off for it. So, that's led to some confusion on some of the NIL rules and players and transferring. So, it's a murky time in
I
college
think
athletics.
It's almost become worse than the way it was, I think, because now it's out in the open and everyone's doing it publicly.
Right. Yeah. It used to be a suitcase and a bag at a bowling alley, but now you're signing a car deal and you're at the dealership, getting a Corvette or something.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think it's ruined college football to a certain extent, and it's become a lot more professional. I mean, I've been watching college football since 2008, 2009, back when it was still amateur.
Yeah.
So anyway, look, at least we still have it. But
yeah,
you mentioned Clemson there. Obviously, not quite the powerhouse they used to be. I don't think. But would you still pick one of the ACC teams to make a title run this year? I mean, Miami, I mentioned, are looking strong. Georgia Tech are looking very strong this year. Do they have the rosters and talent to go all the way?
I mean, I personally pick Syracuse to make the playoff, but I pick them every year, so I'm not sure how much. I'm not sure how much credibility that has. But yeah, like, I mean, end of the day, there's almost. I mean, and last year, to be honest with you, like, to me, it was kind of a travesty that Florida State went undefeated and didn't get a chance to be in the playoff. Like, you can always look back and be like, oh, well, if you want to be in the playoff, take it out of their hands, win every game. Like, well, they did win every game. They won every game, and they didn't get in. So it's like, to me, that, like, I could go on and on about that, but we don't have to worry about that anymore. It's a 12-team playoff. So yeah, Miami, it's like Miami is one of those brands too that 80s, 90s, 2000s, like Miami football was the brand. It was the school, and ever since they kind of joined the ACC, it wasn't necessarily they didn't have the success that the ACC was hoping for when they came over. But, they've always been like knocking on the door. And, Coach Cristobal, and they brought in a quarterback, Cam Ward, that's electric. And they have all the pieces in place. And they absolutely can make a run. And, they just dismantled an SEC school in their stadium. So, we're optimistic. And, listen, again, beginning of the year, we're optimistic about a lot of schools. Georgia Tech looks good. And, NC State's got a lot of talent. And all these schools are undefeated. Syracuse undefeated. Louisville's undefeated. So we're optimistic about all these schools. And I'm sure, push comes to shove, at the end of the day, there's going to be one of the last four standing will be an ACC school. So, who it's going to be, who knows? Probably Miami, it looks like. But, it's week one, in between week 1 and 2. So we got plenty of time to figure things out.
Definitely still a long way to go. I have a question for you, Dan, just to kind of wrap up things. What would be another question, a good question? What's the wildest story you have from your time covering the ACC in college sports, or indeed Major League Baseball? I mean, what's the kind of craziest sporting moment you've ever witnessed?
I mean, the one that kind of sticks out to me, and I always, because I love sports, because when I was a kid, I loved sports. Like, I think a lot of us, we grew up with it, and it just, I don't know, it reminds you of your youth and childhood and all that stuff. And so, again, I've been working in sports for a long time, and you don't really get starstruck when you see these athletes anymore, because it's part of your job. You see them in the clubhouse and locker rooms, all this stuff. But then I was covering like a World Series with the LA Dodgers. This is that MLB Network, covering World Series with LA Dodgers. And I grew up a Yankee fan, and I'm born in 83. So like Don Mattingly was when I was, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, which is like prime sports fandom. And he was the manager, or I think the hitting coach at that time of the Dodgers. And so he's at first base during BP, and like a ball rolls over to me, like it got away from him. And he's like, oh, hey, a little help. And I'm like, I picked it up, and I must have thrown that ball 120 miles an hour back to him. I'm like, I get to throw a ball to Don Mattingly. And like, I immediately called my dad. I'm like, Dad, you'll never guess what just happened. Like Bryce Harper, all these guys could be walking by me, I don't care. But like, that was Don Mattingly, like, that's different. It's your childhood hero. So that one is the one that stands out to me. And that was probably 2000, I don't know, 16, is that 8 years ago, something like that. And it still stands out. So it's just like, it's sometimes every once in a while, you get those moments where, I work in sports, and this is awesome. And, like I was at that US Ghana World Cup game in 2010, or not the US Ghana, the US Algeria game, where Donovan had the goal in the final minute. And it's just like the stadium's erupting. And I'm like, this is my job. There's people out there that are, doing things that aren't nearly as fun. And so there's moments, especially on the road, like that's when I kind of get those like, wow, this is really cool moments. You know, Virginia Tech, I don't know how familiar you are with Virginia Tech, but they're like, they have their entrance. They come out to Enter Sandman, the Metallica song, and like the stadium is just rocky, and like you hear everyone, there's fireworks, and you're just like, man, this is badass.
Yeah.
Like, this is cool. You know, I'm 40 years old, and I still think this is cool. So, you know, there's lots of little times like that where, you know, you're thankful for what you do and you know, what you get to see and experience, you know.
Virginia Tech, Blacksburg, it's definitely on my bucket list of stadiums to visit for a night game, just to hear. I mean, obviously, I'm a massive Metallica fan as well, so there's that element. But just I've seen videos, but the videos clearly do not do it justice. It is.
It's like it's shaking. It's shaking. You get goosebumps. There's fire going everywhere. I've been to a bunch of places. To me, that's the number one like entrance, or you know, whatever you want to call it. So, and that's including like professional. I covered NFL for a while, and although I was at the Aaron the 9/11 game for the Jets. That was my 40th birthday. And when he came out of the tunnel with the American flag on 9/11 and tore his Achilles about 8 minutes later, but that entrance was electric. The entrance was electric. So,
I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about: is enjoying these moments and taking it all in, and kind of saying to yourself, "I get to do this as a job." You know, it's not really work; it's fun, right?
Right. Yeah. And like, listen, there's definitely times where I get frustrated and roll my eyes or get pissed off or whatever. But like, push come to shove, like it's pretty cool. You know, like working in sports, and you're like, I'm going to this. I've been to like an Olympics, a World Cup, a Super Bowl, you know, Final Four. I've been to all these events that I've always wanted to go to, and I get paid to do it. You know, so it's like it's not a bad gig. You know, and again, I got to work weekends. I miss a lot of barbecues, so I do. There is a price to pay. You know.
Well, listen, Dan, thanks a million for joining us. It's really, really fascinating to get your perspective on, you know, what we just take for granted watching on television, and actually getting to see your perspective from behind the scenes and how it all works. Some really cool stories. Best of luck for the rest of the season. And the next time I tune into the ACC network, I'll be keeping an eye out for you.
All right. I appreciate it. When did you say that pick game is? 2027? I got to heal up by then, huh? Okay. Yeah. I'll be walking by then. Don't worry about it. I'll be out.
I hope so. You look after that foot, and we'll see you back in Ireland for your next visit. Pittsburgh and Wisconsin is 2027, I believe. Yeah, so not that long to go.
No, we'll be there. We'll be there.
Dan, all the best. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you very much. Take care.